Boleyn is primarily remembered by history as the scheming seductress who tricked Henry VIII into leaving his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, to marry her instead for the sole purpose of pushing her own political agenda. As you may have guessed by the nature of this show, that is all crap. Anne Boleyn was a savvy, worldly, educated, and passionate young woman who fell in love with the king and held his heart in return. She took the throne and used the power that position gave her to spread her belief of equality amongst the classes in the Catholic Church, as well as her belief in gender equality between man and wife in a marriage. It was this forward-thinking fire in her heart that caused her to lose her life to the vile patriarch, Henry VIII. Welcome to the finale of Her Story Season 1. Today, we're talking about Anne Boleyn.
History forgot them, defamed them, destroyed them. We're putting them back in the narrative. The women lost to history will become the stories you won't forget. This is her story.
Anne was born in 1501, and by the age of 12, she was sent to the court of Margaret Savoy in the Netherlands to work as one of her ladies. Margaret was very impressed by Anne, and it was here that Anne began to receive an education that was much more in-depth and eclectic than that of most English court ladies. Anne didn't just learn the typical things of an English lady like French, dancing, and how to play a musical instrument. She also learned about art, theology, and politics. She was encouraged to formulate her own opinions and express them, which is something that was rarely, if ever, encouraged in young women in Europe at the time. By 1514, Anne was summoned to France to work in the service of Princess Claude, and whilst there, she was under the tutelage of one of Europe's most prominent feminists of the time, Marguerite of Navarre. Marguerite would help ignite Anne's passions for evangelical theological studies and gender equality studies. She was calming Anne to become the feisty woman that she would be by the time she returned to England in 1521 to work as a lady-in-waiting for the Queen of England, Catherine of Aragon.
I think it made her a lot more sophisticated than English girls in the same period, and also because Margaret of Navarre was such a reformer. Mm-hmm. So I imagine that there would have been women in the English court at the time who would have been interested in reformist stuff.
Catherine of Aragon, of course, had no idea how serious a threat Anne was going to become for her. Catherine was a princess of Spain, raised her whole life trained to be the Queen of England and the Princess of Wales. She was betrothed to Henry VIII's late older brother Arthur in her childhood, and when Arthur died young, Catherine held on to that ambition to make sure that she then became Henry VIII's wife and still ensured that she would be Queen of England. When Anne first arrived back in England, her father, Thomas Boleyn, had an intended husband for her already set up. It was her cousin, James Butler. Now, for whatever reason, the match fell through. Many speculate that it was because both parties were not fond of each other. And while back then, as a woman, your opinions about your intended husband did not matter, it did for the husband. So the marriage fell through, and Anne was single as a young woman in her 20s, a time when most women her age were already married, with children or with children on the way. Anne's sister Mary at this time was now King Henry VIII's formal mistress, which, while not as respectable as a marriage, still kept the Boleyn family in the king's good graces. So Anne decided to do something unthinkable. She took her life into her own hands. Anne soon met young Henry Percy at court, and the two fell in love and took part in a private betrothal ceremony. Now, sometimes betrothal ceremonies were in fact as binding as an actual marriage, but rarely. They almost always fell through, and this betrothal was no different. You see, King Henry VIII's current right-hand man at the time, Cardinal Wolsey, found out about the match, and he and Henry VIII were pretty mad. Because members of the king's court were expected to seek the king's permission for marital arrangements, and young people were definitely supposed to seek the permission of their father, especially a woman. So the betrothal was declared null and void. Henry Percy was told to never see Anne again, and Anne was sent away from court, shamed, and once again single, which was a terrible thing to be as a young woman in 16th century England. A year later, in 1524, Anne returned back to court and back into the service of Catherine. Scandal was already beginning to follow her like a shadow. See, Anne's French upbringing caused her to stand out from all the other English women at court. English-raised court ladies were taught to be docile, obedient, and all-around quiet. They were not encouraged to have opinions, and they were told that they existed for the sole enjoyment of their husband and that they were in no way equal to them. Anne, however, was raised to speak out about politics and gender equality. She was boisterous and cunning and shrewd.
Obviously, growing up overseas, you're exposed to a lot more different cultures. Like, obviously, the French court was very much got a lot of mix of different aspects and different cultures in the English court, and I think growing up just in the English court alone would have made her less worldly and less, not really cultured, but less able to sort of keep the king's attention, because, you know, that was one of the things that attracted Henry to her, was that the fact she, you know, was a poet and she could sing and she could play instruments and she had all this like worldly knowledge, so I think that he would have tired of her quickly.
Was everything that made Anne so different from all the other women at court that made her the new conquest of the king. It is suspected that after Henry kicked Mary Boleyn out of his bed and began to court her younger sister Anne, that Anne was counseled privately by her father to utilize the king's affection with her for personal gain.
Not just Mary, they say that all his liaisons are soon over. He blows hot, he blows cold.
Perhaps you could imagine a way to keep his interest more prolonged? I dare say you learned things in France, how to play his passions.
So the courting began. Henry originally just wanted Anne for a mistress because the idea of divorcing one's wife in 16th century England was inconceivable.
Majesty, I have already given my maidenhead into my husband's hands, and whoever he is, only he will have it.
Oh, Anne.
Because I know how it goes otherwise. My sister is called the Great Prostitute by everyone.
She wasn't someone who just fell in love and she was like really high on the love that she had for Henry. Obviously there was a love there for him and that would have had an impact on it, but I don't think that she solely wanted to be queen just because she wanted to further her agenda. I think she really had a genuine love for Henry, at least in the early part of the relationship.
I love His Majesty. I believe he loves me.
He's infatuated by you as men often are by new things. Soon he will see you for what you really are. And he will tire of you. As of all the others.
And what if he does not?
So Henry began the long journey of seeking a divorce from Catherine of Aragon so that he could marry Anne Boleyn. He used the excuse that he felt religious guilt over marrying his late brother's wife and based this off a passage from Leviticus, suspected by the Pope and pretty much everyone else involved in Henry's plea for divorce that he wasn't doing it for religious reasons. He was doing it because he was bored with his current wife and he wanted a new one. Henry began to commission Cardinal Wolsey to help him on his quest to receive a divorce, and after pulling many strings, Catherine's marriage was going to be put on trial. Despite the public backlash against Anne, Henry continued courting her anyway. He gave Anne royal lodgings at court that were just down the hall and not only from his private apartments, but also from Catherine's. He didn't want to just make it clear to Anne that she was on her way up, he also wanted to make it very clear to Catherine that she was on her way out. Foreign relations began to also make it clear that they did not support the king's behavior. In 1527, Emperor Charles made it clear to King Henry VIII that he supported his aunt, Catherine of Aragon, in her refusal to renounce her marriage. Catherine received, however, a glimmer of hope in 1528 when Anne fell very sick with the sweating sickness, and Catherine deemed it God's will that Anne die for overreaching the power deemed by her station of birth. While Catherine was definitely being treated very unfairly, she still herself exhibited some very vile and sexist behaviors towards Anne. Instead of maybe feeling sorry that another young woman was about to unknowingly enter into a toxic marriage with the emotionally abusive Henry VIII, she decided that Anne deserved to die for daring to reach for power. Catherine was a big believer in the class system that her beloved papacy so adamantly reinforced, but Her hopes were dashed when Anne recovered in full health and returned to the king's side. In 1529, the trial finally happened, and the court and the church ultimately sided with Catherine. Now, logically, that should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. Henry was now looking to the Reformation, not because he believed in the cause, but because it suited his agenda of finding a new wife.
Some who on good authority care not for popes. These writers say that the king is both emperor and pope absolutely in his own kingdom.
I think a lot of it probably would have been politically motivated.
Do you think that's wrong of her to like have only wanted to be queen politically, or like that's perfectly fine?
I think in the context of the time, it was probably fine, because obviously at the time, like, love matches weren't really a thing, and there were a lot of other women. Like, I could think of like Isabella of France and Eleanor of Aquitaine, who were very politically motivated.
The Reformation believed that the papacy was corrupt, which it was. They believed that a person should have control over their own faith and that the church should not have control over the court. So Henry enlisted the help of Thomas Cromwell, a proud Protestant reformist, to help him create the Church of England and renounce the papacy and their control. And he was now the sole sovereign leader of not just the court, but of the country's church and faith. In 1532, Henry finally sent Catherine away from court and began to make royal lodgings for Anne. The final step Anne had to take before officially becoming Queen of England was to accompany Henry to France, where he would introduce her to King Francis I as his partner and intended wife. Anne was presented to Francis I on October 27th by means of an elaborate masked dance with a banquet to follow, and Francis even sent her a diamond as a symbol of friendship. However, his wife did not support her ascension to the throne and refused to attend the ceremony.
Where she's talking to King Francis, and King Francis is like, the station you'll be asked to occupy is not an easy one. It's far easier to have everything, it's far easier to have nothing than everything, or something to the effect of that. And she just looked at him like he was just saying that you're not being able to do this.
Yeah, like you're not good enough, you're not smart enough.
And I'm just thinking, well, if she's gotten this far, like she's gotten Henry to kick out Catherine, to put her away from court. Like, obviously she's going to be something.
When it was time to return to England, their trip ended up being delayed by bad weather, and they had to stay another night. It's believed that this is when Anne conceived her first child, Princess Elizabeth Tudor, who would go on to be Queen Elizabeth I. Anne and Henry returned to England on November 14th and got married in secret later that day without the blessing of the Pope, but they did not care. England had formally rejected the papacy, and Henry could now rule as he saw fit. 2 months later, an official wedding ceremony was held. Then, on Thursday, May 29th, 1533, the official coronation process began, and Anne was crowned that following Saturday. After 6 long years of waiting, Anne was finally the Queen of England. Anne's first setback as queen came with the birth of her daughter, Elizabeth. See, Anne had promised Henry and England that she could do what Catherine was not, bear sons and heirs to the Tudor throne. So when she had a girl and not a boy, this set her back with respect in the eyes of her husband and her country.
Thinks that she has the last hope for producing a Tudor heir.
But Anne tried not to let it bother her that much, and instead focused her attentions on the political work that she was so passionate about and so happy that she got a chance to do as queen. But you see, queens were expected to only partake in pillow talk political suggestions. They were not meant to sit in on meetings and discuss political reform openly with the king, but Anne did just that. Anne's biggest passion project was the Common English Bible. You see, the Bible was written and Mass was heard in Latin, a language that only learned English people of a higher class had the ability to learn, read, and understand, which meant that people of a lower class could not understand Mass or even read the Lord's Word. And Anne believed that this wasn't right and that the class divides of the faith should be broken down. So she commissioned that Bibles be printed in English and that the Mass be heard in English as well.
I also hear that all the wealth and assets of the monasteries are to be transferred to the king's treasury.
Indeed, I intend to make the king the most powerful and the richest king in Europe.
But surely some of that wealth could be put to better uses.
Better uses, madam?
Yes, for endowments to charitable and educational causes.
Catherine, of course, being the devout papist Catholic that she was, reeled at this, as did her followers. For Anne's fellow Protestant reformists, while they agreed with everything Anne believed in and was doing, they resented the fact that it was a woman who was leading their movement. They resented the fact that the king was listening to the political suggestions of the Queen.
We disagreed on an important and public issue.
And I did not bring you up to have opinions, or to express them, or to quarrel with those closest to the crown.
But I am closest to the crown. I am the king's wife.
And you should remember how you got there.
I know how I got there. And it was not all you. It was not all you, or Norfolk, or George, or any other man you want to name. It was also me. He fell in love with me. He respected me. And my opinions.
1534, Anne fell pregnant again and miscarried, and this was a fatal strike against her. Anne's fertility was now following the same pattern as Catherine before her, a daughter and then miscarriages, and Henry was furious about this. So in the face of what Henry saw as another failed marriage, he began to take on mistresses again, and Anne was livid. But Anne didn't go down without a fight. She confronted him angrily about his infidelity, something that Catherine had never done, something that no woman in Henry's presence had ever done to him, and Henry did not react well to this. Many believe that it was Anne standing up for herself in the face of his infidelity in their marriage that started to get the gears turning in Henry's mind that Anne needed to go. By 1535, this idea that Anne needed to go was pretty much cemented in Henry's brain when he met the next woman he wanted to marry, one of Anne's ladies, Jane Seymour.
Would have felt quite safe at the time, and then obviously she would have been convinced of the fact that she was going to give Henry a son, which was what he wanted. So I imagine she probably would have been like, she was convinced that she was going to give him a son, so it was all going to be totally fine. But I do wonder if there was, like, at some point in the back of her mind, it was like, well, if he could so easily give up his wife that he was in love with at the start, his wife of, like, I think it was 20-something years, just to, like, yeah, just because he fancied someone else and wasn't quite getting what he wanted from her. I think maybe, like, knowing his personality and knowing kind of what he could do.
And what he has given, he can take away. And what taken away, he can give back.
At this point, Anne's marriage was failing. Henry hated her. He resented her. He didn't like her lack of popularity amongst the people, even though it wasn't really her fault. But nonetheless, he sent his spies out to find cases against her, anything he could use to get rid of her. So his spies came back with an accusation against her that was wholly unoriginal for accusing a woman with adultery. They also accused her of incest, sleeping with her own brother. They also found accounts of treason against her for a rogue joke she made to a quarter of one of her ladies, Sir Henry Norris, when she had said to him that he really only wanted to court her and was searching for dead men's shoes. In other words, jokingly insinuating that Sir Norris was waiting for the king to die so that he could marry Anne. And even though this comment was said in jest, it was illegal to speak about the death of the king. There was no free speech. It was a joke made by a depressed and lonely woman, and it was now cause for arrest. Anne miscarried again, and this was the final straw for Henry.
My boy! Get some help!
You've lost my boy. I cannot speak of it.
Had her arrested on May 2nd and taken to the Tower just days after going through the traumatic event of losing a child. There's really no point in getting into every detail of the trial. They presented made up and over-exaggerated accusations against Anne, and it didn't matter what she said or what the truth actually was. It was Henry's court, and he had decided she deserved to die.
I don't think she was guilty.
I'm gonna say this, like, I think half the rumours are just bullshit.
The night before Anne's execution, she began to lose her resolve. She is infamously noted to have gone into hysterics when starting to panic about the pain that the executioner could cause if the sword did not strike true, and then she started laughing and said, "It's okay, I have only a little neck."
it was just a way to deal with the situation.
We're just not reacting rationally but I think as well it's totally different because back then obviously everyone would have been really religious, and she would have had like a firm belief that she was going to heaven, and she wouldn't have been like really scared of death.
Life was full of so much pain at this point, her spirit so battered and beaten down, that it may have very well seemed to her in this moment that death was the only way to end all her pain. On May 19th, 1536, Anne was walked to the scaffold dressed in purple to a crowd of silent onlookers. She walked fiercely and proudly. She did not cry or waver before the onlookers and gave a proud and profound speech. She ended it with saying, "And thus I take my leave of this world and all of you, and I heartily ask for all of you to pray for me."
Shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures.
Oh Lord, take pity on my soul. Jesus Christ, receive my soul. Oh Lord God, pity on my soul. Jesus, receive my soul.
It took one strike, and Anne Boleyn was dead. 3 of the 4 queens I've covered this season died by execution. Mary Stuart by her rival, Marie Antoinette by her country, but Anne Boleyn is different. Anne Boleyn was executed by her husband, a man who stood up before the court and God and promised to love her and protect her above all others. He did it because of her independence and confidence and challenging opinions, because they pissed him off. Later go on to kill his 5th wife and threaten to kill his other wives. Women who were later pressured by their families to enter into marriages with him feared for their lives. Yet England still considers him one of their greatest monarchs, a man who took pleasure in killing women who refused to bow down to his abuse. Henry didn't actually swing the sword himself, but he commanded it to be done. He murdered his own wife, and nobody stopped him, because what did the life of one woman matter? Henry is still the one who gets the movies and TV shows and books and songs written about him. His wives are all lumped together. The 6 wives of Henry VIII aren't seen for the individual women they were. They fade into the background.
I think it's just because, history is recorded from a male perspective.
Yeah.
And it's like, this one male had 6 different women vying for his attention, or he had 6 wives within his reign. It's not like, these 6 individual women were wives to this one man. It's this one man had 6 wives.
Yeah.
We all have such interesting and unusual stories. Like, there's never really been a king like Henry or experiences like the Tudor period, and I think that's part of the reason why everyone's so fascinated by the Tudors.
If you've learned anything this season, I hope it's to not blindly trust what you were told by men about women. History is written by the men, and when they write it, the women so often get erased or demonized. There's rarely an in-between. But now we know a little bit more of the truth about Mary, Wu, Marie, and Anne. Hold on to it. Let it inspire you to go seek the truth about other women from history, to go share their stories with other people. Above all else, to just remember them. Remember them with respect and honor. Remember them for the remarkable women that they were, because they were remarkable.
We are on the edge of a golden world.
Opinionated, yeah, she did bad things, and like she wasn't always nice, but she's like such an interesting person.
It's actually changed the world.
I'm Molly Likovich. This has been Her Story. I thank you so much for watching.